The townspeople froze mid-stride, rifles lowering as they stared at the impossible scene before them. The 400-pound black Brahmin bull they'd voted to execute was standing protectively over the unconscious Cherokee veteran, not attacking him. What they expected to find was a mauling. What they discovered was a guardian angel with horns. Mrs. Eleanor Crow, Feather, dropped her walking cane, the wooden clatter echoing across the dusty Oklahoma ground as Dr. Marcus Red Hawk stumbled backward, his veterinary bag spilling tranquilizer darts meant for Spirit's execution. Little Mary Dove pressed her face against her grandmother's trembling hands, remembering just yesterday when this same monster had gently nudged her away from the creek's dangerous current, a kindness no adult had witnessed. "Nobody moves!" Sheriff Thomas Blackhorse commanded, though his own voice cracked with uncertainty as Spirit's intelligent brown eyes met his without malice. How had they gotten it so wrong about the bull everyone feared? And what secret was worth hiding beneath the crumbling Thunderheart trading post that someone had tried to kill Joe to protect? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Joseph Joe Thunderheart had been broken long before he inherited the monster. At 32, the Cherokee veteran carried Afghanistan in his shoulders, hunched forward like he was still dodging mortar fire, still searching dusty roads for the IED that had already claimed his best friend Samuel Whitehorse 3 years ago. The cramped FEMA trailer behind his father's abandoned trading post had become his bunker, stocked with cheap whiskey instead of ammunition, fighting a war against memories that never retreated. The Thunderheart trading post squatted on 15 acres of red Oklahoma clay like a dying animal. What had once been the heart of the Cherokee community, selling everything from saddles to ceremonial sage, now stood with boarded windows and a roof that leaked contempt. The hand-painted sign reading "Thunderhearts Serving the Nation Since 1952 had faded to illegible whispers, much like Joe's connection to his heritage, his family, and himself. Spirit had arrived with the will like a final insult from Colonel Robert Thunderheart, a father who'd spent more time loving his country than his children. The bull was a massive Brahmin, black as midnight with patches of rust red across his scarred hide that looked like dried blood in the Oklahoma sun. At 1,400 pounds, he was more force of nature than farm animal, with a hump that rose like a small mountain and horns that could puncture steel. The entire Cherokee community had taken one look at Spirit and declared him a menace. 73 votes for immediate euthanization, 12 against. "That thing's got devil eyes," Dr. Marcus Red Hawk had pronounced at the emergency town meeting, his veterinary authority lending weight to the fear rippling through the community center. "I've seen bulls turn on their owners. We're talking about children's safety here." Joe's siblings had made their positions crystal clear during the will reading. Mason Thunderheart, 35 and sharp as his tailored suits, ran a tech company in Tulsa that made him rich enough to buy and sell small towns. "Typical dad," he'd sneered, leaving the failure with the liability. Sophia Thunderheart managed high-end art galleries across 3 states, her blonde hair pulled back in the kind of perfect chignon that took money to maintain. "Maybe this will finally teach you responsibility, Joseph, though I doubt it." Neither had wanted the trading post, the bull, or their damaged baby brother who'd come home from war speaking to ghosts. They'd gotten trust funds. Joe had gotten a crumbling building and a creature everyone wanted dead. The only voice of support came from an unexpected source. Eleanor Crow Feather, 78 years old and sharp as broken glass, who lived in the neat little house closest to the trading post. "That bull sees something you don't," she'd told Joe over homemade cornbread and knowing looks. "Your daddy wasn't the type to leave loose ends. Maybe you should ask yourself why he left you something everyone's so eager to get rid of." Now, 48 hours later, Joe sat on his trailer steps watching Spirit graze in the small paddock Colonel Robert had built. The bull's movements were surprisingly graceful for something so massive, and when their eyes met across the dusty yard, Joe felt an uncomfortable stirring, not fear but recognition. The inheritance ceremony had felt like a funeral where the wrong person died. Attorney David Clearwater, a thin man whose Cherokee heritage showed only in his cheekbones, had read Colonel Robert's will with the enthusiasm of someone announcing train delays. The Thunderheart children sat in his cramped Broken Arrow office like strangers at a bus stop, Mason checking his phone every 30 seconds, Sophia studying her manicured nails, and Joe wondering if it was too early in the day to start drinking. "To my son Mason," Clearwater had droned, "I leave a trust fund of $2 million to be managed by Clearwater and Associates until his 40th birthday." Mason's smile had been thin and calculating. "To my daughter Sophia, I leave an identical trust fund under the same conditions." Sophia had simply nodded, as if accepting her due. Then came Joe's turn. "To my youngest son Joseph, I leave the entirety of the Thunderheart Trading Post, including all buildings, land, livestock, and the sacred cave that belonged to his great-grandfather, Standing Bear. May he find the strength our ancestors showed, and may he protect what truly matters." The lawyer had handed Joe a small velvet pouch containing a brass key unlike anything he'd ever seen. It was heavy, ornate, with Cherokee symbols etched into metal that seemed too bright for its apparent age. "Your father left specific instructions that this key opens what matters most, though he didn't elaborate on the location." Spirit's reaction to Joe had been the day's only surprise. When the massive bull had been led from the livestock trailer into the trading post's back paddock, everyone had expected trouble. Instead, Spirit had taken one look at Joe and become perfectly calm, almost meditative. The bull that had supposedly charged 3 different handlers during transport simply stood there, studying Joe with dark, intelligent eyes that seemed far too knowing for an animal. That first night together had nearly been their last. Joe had sat on his trailer steps with his father's service pistol in one hand and a bottle of Jack Daniels in the other, watching Spirit move through the paddock like a shadow. The bull was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often were, powerful, unpredictable, and carrying something wild that civilization couldn't quite tame. "Just you and me now, boy," Joe had whispered to the darkness, raising the pistol, "both of us too broken for this world." That's when Spirit had done something impossible. The bull had somehow pushed through the reinforced fence, not broken it, but opened the gate with what looked like deliberate intelligence, and approached Joe with steps so careful they barely disturbed the gravel. When Joe had raised the gun, Spirit had gently pushed it away with his massive head, the weapon falling harmlessly to the ground. For 20 minutes, man and bull had simply looked at each other. Joe had cried then, really cried for the first time since Sam's death, and Spirit had stayed close enough that Joe could feel the warmth radiating from his huge body. When Mrs. Henderson from across the road had spotted them through her window and called the sheriff about a bull attack in progress, Joe had been asleep against Spirit's side while the bull stood guard. The next morning brought Dr. Marcus Redhawk and Animal Control Officer Janet Horsechief to Joe's door, both armed with tranquilizer equipment and grim expressions. "Joe, we've got to talk about this situation," Dr. Redhawk had said, gesturing toward Spirit, who was calmly eating hay near the fence. "3 people called in reports of an attack last night." "No attack," Joe had replied, his hangover making every word feel like swallowing gravel. "He saved my life." "A bull that size doesn't save lives, son. It takes them." Dr. Redhawk's voice carried the authority of 40 years treating livestock. "We're talking about putting the whole community at risk. That animal belongs in a slaughterhouse, not a residential area." The real discovery had come that afternoon while Joe was half-heartedly cleaning his father's cluttered office in the Trading Post basement. Spirit had somehow gotten inside, again through what should have been locked doors, and was acting agitated near a specific section of the stone foundation wall. The bull kept pawing at the ground and looking at Joe expectantly, like a dog wanting to play fetch. Following Spirit's gaze, Joe had noticed something odd about one particular stone. It wasn't quite flush with the others, and there was a small depression in its center shaped like a keyhole. The brass key from his father's will slid into the depression perfectly. The mechanism that activated was unlike anything Joe had expected from a building constructed in 1952. The stone slid aside silently, revealing not another room but a natural cave entrance that descended into darkness. Cool air flowed up from the depths, carrying scents of earth and something else, something that smelled like the electronics from his army days. Spirit looked at the cave entrance, then at Joe, then back at the cave. His message was unmistakable. "Follow me." The cave descended 40 feet into the Oklahoma earth before opening into something that defied everything Joe thought he knew about his father. What had begun as a natural limestone cavern had been transformed into a sophisticated command center that looked like it belonged in a government facility, not beneath a failing trading post. Banks of computer equipment hummed quietly along reinforced walls, their LED displays casting blue light across Cherokee petroglyphs that had been carefully preserved during the installation. A central desk held multiple monitors, communication equipment, and filing cabinets that looked military-grade secure. Spirit had led him down the carved stone steps with the confidence of someone who'd made this journey before, his massive hooves finding purchase on surfaces that seemed designed for his weight. The bull moved through the underground facility like he owned it, finally settling in a corner where a custom-built reinforced platform had been installed, clearly Spirit's designated spot during what must have been regular visits with Colonel Robert. The moment Joe's weight settled into the command chair, motion sensors activated a large wall-mounted screen. His father's face appeared in high definition, recorded but somehow still commanding, even in death. Colonel Robert Thunderheart sat in full dress uniform, his Cherokee features weathered by decades of service, his dark eyes holding the same intensity Joe remembered from childhood. "Joseph," his father's voice filled the cave with familiar authority, "if you're watching this, then you've found your way to the truth I've protected for 30 years. What you see around you is DIA Outpost Cherokee 7, established in 1983 during the height of the Cold War. I have served as its commander and sole operator since its inception." Joe's hands gripped the chair arms as the revelation hit him. Defense Intelligence Agency. His father hadn't been a simple Army colonel who'd retired to run a trading post. He'd been running a deep-cover intelligence operation disguised as a failing business, monitoring threats to national security from the heart of Cherokee Nation territory. "This facility served multiple purposes," Colonel Robert continued, his recorded image never breaking eye contact with the camera. "Intelligence gathering, secure communications for agents in the field, and safe house operations for defectors and witnesses. The trading post above provided perfect cover. Who would suspect a struggling Native American business of housing classified operations?" The financial revelations came next, numbers that made Joe's military pension look like pocket change. Through his intelligence work, Colonel Robert had accumulated legitimate wealth from successful operations, careful investments, and rewards for intelligence that had prevented terrorist attacks. The total sum was staggering, $200 million, held in accounts so secure they required biometric identification and codes that only Joe now possessed. "I didn't leave this fortune to Mason or Sophia," his father's image explained, "because they have already chosen their paths. Your brother uses his technology company as a front for illegal arms sales. Your sister launders money through her art galleries for the same criminal network. They believe I never discovered their activities, but I've been building a case against them for 3 years." The words hit Joe like physical blows. His own family, his blood, were arms dealers. The weapons they sold found their way to insurgents, cartels, and terrorists. The very people Joe had fought against in Afghanistan were being supplied by his brother and sister, funded by blood money that let them live in luxury while soldiers died overseas. But the worst revelation was yet to come. Colonel Roberts' expression grew somber as he continued, "The IED components that killed your friend Samuel Whitehorse were traced back to a shipment facilitated by Mason's company. Your sister's gallery provided the money laundering for that particular transaction. Joseph, your family's greed killed your best friend." Joe's vision blurred as rage and grief collided in his chest. Sam's death hadn't been random bad luck or the fortunes of war. It had been murder for profit, carried out by the people who were supposed to love him most. He thought of Sam's last words, "Take care of your family, brother." The irony was suffocating. A second recording activated, this one showing Colonel Robert with Spirit as a younger bull. "This brings me to your inheritance that everyone considers a burden. Spirit isn't just a bull, son. I spent 5 years training him using techniques I learned from K9 units and working animal specialists. He's been trained in threat detection, defensive positioning, finding hidden objects, and most importantly, protecting you." The video showed Spirit performing tasks that seemed impossible for livestock, opening specific doors using his horns, detecting hidden compartments, even distinguishing between friends and threats based on behavioral cues. Joe watched his father work patiently with the massive animal, building trust and communication that transcended species barriers. "I couldn't protect you in Afghanistan." Colonel Roberts' voice grew heavy with parental regret. "But I could give you a guardian for when you came home. Spirit has been trained specifically for your protection because I knew this day would come. Mason and Sophia will eventually discover what you've inherited, and they will try to eliminate the threat you represent to their criminal empire." As if summoned by the recording, Spirit rose from his platform and approached Joe's chair. The bull's massive head came to rest gently against Joe's shoulder, and for the first time since Sam's death, Joe felt truly protected. This wasn't just an animal his father had left him. This was a living weapon designed specifically to keep him safe. The final part of the recording contained operational details, contact protocols for Agent Sarah Runninghorse, his father's FBI handler, locations of evidence caches, and instructions for accessing the full extent of the intelligence Colonel Robert had gathered on the arms trafficking network. Everything needed to bring down Mason and Sophia's criminal organization was at Joe's fingertips. But as the recording ended and the cave fell silent except for the humming of electronics, Joe realized he faced an impossible choice. He could use this evidence to destroy his family and avenge Sam's death, or he could try to save Mason and Sophia from themselves. Either way, the broken veteran who'd stumbled into this cave was gone forever, replaced by someone who held the power to change everything. Spirit's warm breath against his neck reminded him he wouldn't face this choice alone. The first week after discovering his father's secret transformed Joe from a broken drunk into something he'd forgotten he could be, a soldier with a mission. Agent Sarah Runninghorse arrived on a Tuesday morning disguised as a livestock inspector, her Cherokee features and professional demeanor allowing her to blend seamlessly into the rural Oklahoma landscape. At 48, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who'd spent decades navigating dangerous waters. And when she looked at Joe, he saw recognition of a fellow warrior. "Your father was the best operative I ever worked with," Sarah said as they descended into the command center, Spirit following like a massive protective shadow. Robert spent 3 years building an airtight case against your siblings. What we need now is to decrypt the final evidence files and coordinate with federal prosecutors. The basement facility became their war room. Joe's Army intelligence training, rusty but intact, proved invaluable as they worked through encrypted files that revealed the staggering scope of Mason and Sophia's criminal network. The arms trafficking operation spanned 12 countries, with Mason's legitimate tech company serving as the perfect front for selling restricted military-grade components to anyone willing to pay premium prices. Spirit's role in the investigation surprised everyone, including Joe. The Bull demonstrated an uncanny ability to locate hidden items throughout the trading post. USB drives concealed in false bottom drawers, documents tucked behind loose floorboards, even a laptop hidden in the grain storage bins. Each discovery painted a clearer picture of Colonel Roberts' methodical documentation of his children's crimes. "How does he know where to look?" Sarah asked, watching Spirit carefully nose around a bookshelf before indicating a specific volume with his horn. "Dad trained him for 5 years, Joe replied, pulling out the book to reveal a hollowed-out interior containing financial records. "He's not just finding random hiding spots. He's following a search pattern Dad taught him." The emotional toll of the investigation weighed heavily on Joe. Each piece of evidence revealed another layer of betrayal. Bank records showed Mason had used their father's military contacts to identify vulnerable supply chains. Communications logs revealed Sophia manipulating art buyers who were actually cartel money launderers. Most damning were the shipping manifests that directly linked their components to the IED that had killed Sam and 3 other soldiers in Joe's unit. Eleanor Crow. Feather proved to be more than a concerned neighbor. On Thursday evening, she arrived at the trading post carrying her usual offering of cornbread, but this time she wore a small pin that Sarah immediately recognized, a CIA service insignia from the Cold War era. 43 years with the company, Eleanor said matter-of-factly, settling into the command center like she belonged there. Worked with your father on more operations than either of us probably should have survived. I've been keeping watch over this place since he passed. Her intelligence background proved invaluable. Eleanor's contacts in various agencies helped verify information and coordinate surveillance without alerting Mason and Sophia to the investigation. She also provided crucial insight into the community dynamics that would soon become important. The pressure on Joe from the community intensified daily. Dr. Marcus Redhawk led an increasingly vocal campaign to have Spirit removed, organizing petition drives and emergency town meetings. The arguments were always the same: public safety, insurance liability, the danger of keeping a wild animal in a residential area. But Joe began to notice something else in the community sphere: genuine concern mixed with ignorance. "People don't understand what they're looking at," Eleanor observed one evening as they watched protesters gather outside the trading post. "They see size and assume danger. They see different and assume threat. It's the same prejudice your ancestors faced, just aimed at a bull instead of people." The breakthrough in community perception came unexpectedly. 6-year-old Mary Dove, Eleanor's great-granddaughter, had been playing near the creek that bordered the trading post property when she slipped on wet rocks and fell into the fast-moving water. Her terrified screams brought Spirit running, and without hesitation, the massive bull waded into the creek. Using incredible gentleness for an animal his size, Spirit had maneuvered Mary to safety, allowing her to grab onto his horn while he slowly backed out of the water. The incident was witnessed by 12 people, including Dr. Redhawk, who had been driving past when he heard the screaming. The veterinarian found himself performing an impossible mental reconciliation. The dangerous bull he'd been campaigning to remove had just saved a child's life with intelligence and compassion that defied everything he thought he knew about livestock behavior. "I've been a veterinarian for 40 years. Dr. Red Hawk told Joe later that day, his voice heavy with the weight of reconsidering firmly held beliefs. I've never seen an animal show that kind of judgment. Spirit didn't just react to the emergency. He problem-solved. He showed restraint. He demonstrated what I can only call empathy. Word of Mary's rescue spread through the Cherokee community like wildfire, creating the first cracks in the unanimous opposition to Spirit's presence. Children began asking their parents if they could visit the hero bull, and some of the more traditional elders started wondering aloud if perhaps there was something sacred about an animal that protected Cherokee children. But the investigation was also attracting unwanted attention. Mason and Sophia, initially dismissive of their broken brother's inheritance, began showing increased interest in the trading post. They hired a private investigator to assess the property's value, ostensibly for family financial planning. But Sarah's surveillance revealed the PI was actually conducting security sweeps and looking for evidence of valuable assets. The first direct threat came on a Saturday night. Joe was in the command center reviewing shipping manifests when Spirit's behavior changed dramatically. The bull, who normally remained calm and observant, became agitated, moving restlessly between the cave entrance and Joe's position. His ears were forward, his massive body tense with alertness. "Something's wrong," Joe told Sarah over the secure phone line. "Spirit's acting like he does when he's found something important, but this feels different." "Trust his instincts," Sarah replied. "Your father trained him to detect threats, not just hidden objects. Get to a defensive position and stay alert." 20 minutes later, two figures in dark clothing approached the trading post from the rear, moving with the careful precision of professionals. They carried electronic equipment and what looked like break-in tools, clearly intending to search the building for whatever valuable assets Mason and Sophia suspected their father had hidden. Spirit's response was immediate and decisive. The bull positioned himself between the intruders and the cave entrance, and when they tried to approach the building, he charged, not to attack but to drive them away from what he'd been trained to protect. The sight of 1,400 pounds of protective fury bearing down on them sent the intruders scrambling back to their vehicle and fleeing into the night. Joe's call to Sarah resulted in federal agents identifying the vehicle through traffic cameras. The intruders were private security contractors with military backgrounds. Expensive professionals that suggested Mason and Sophia were taking their brother's inheritance very seriously indeed. The incident forced a crucial realization. The passive phase of the investigation was ending. Mason and Sophia were moving from suspicious to desperate, and desperate people with criminal connections made dangerous enemies. Joe found himself depending more heavily on Spirit's protective presence, and the bond between them deepened beyond mere companionship into something approaching partnership. "Your father knew this would happen," Eleanor observed during one of their evening strategy sessions. "He trained Spirit not just to protect you, but to help you find the strength to protect yourself. That bull sees something in you that you're still learning to see." The community dynamics continued to shift as more people witnessed Spirit's intelligence and gentleness. Mary Dove's grandmother began bringing other children to visit, carefully supervised meetings that allowed the bull to demonstrate his calm nature around those he was meant to protect. Dr. Red Hawk, struggling with his changing understanding of Spirit, began providing veterinary care and became an unlikely advocate for reconsidering the community's position. But the most significant development came from an unexpected source, Sophia herself. Sarah's surveillance team reported that Joe's sister had been conducting her own investigation into their father's assets, and her searches were becoming increasingly frantic. Financial records showed unusual activity in her gallery accounts, suggesting cash flow problems that made their father's inheritance critically important to her survival. "She's scared," Sarah concluded after reviewing the intelligence. "The art market has taken a downturn, and without steady money laundering income, her galleries are failing. She needs that inheritance to stay afloat." Mason's situation was different but equally desperate. His tech company was under federal scrutiny for export violations, and several key clients had been arrested in overseas operations. The arms trafficking network that had made him wealthy was collapsing, and he needed new resources to rebuild his criminal enterprise. "They're not just greedy anymore," Joe realized during a late-night conversation with Eleanor and Sarah. "They're fighting for survival, and that makes them infinitely more dangerous." The investigation revealed one final, crucial piece of information. The shipping manifests that linked Mason's components to Sam's death were part of a larger pattern. Over the past 3 years, weapons and bomb-making materials sold through the Thunderheart criminal network had killed 47 American soldiers and countless civilians in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. Joe stared at the numbers on the computer screen, feeling the weight of each life lost to his family's greed. Spirit seemed to sense his emotional turmoil, moving close enough that Joe could feel the bull's warm breath on his shoulder, a living reminder that he wasn't alone in carrying this burden. "The question now," Sarah said quietly, "is whether we move forward with arrests or try to turn one of them to help us bring down the entire network." Joe looked at Spirit, thinking of his father's final message about protecting what truly mattered. The choice was no longer about family loyalty or personal revenge. It was about preventing more soldiers like Sam from dying for other people's profit. The annual Cherokee Rodeo arrived in Broken Arrow like a homecoming celebration, and final judgment rolled into one. For 3 days, the entire community would gather at the Cherokee Nation Fairgrounds to honor their heritage through traditional competitions, storytelling, and the kind of fellowship that bound scattered families back together. This year, however, the rodeo carried an undercurrent of tension that had nothing to do with bronc riding or barrel racing and everything to do with the 400-pound bull that Joe Thunderheart planned to bring as his final proof that Spirit belonged in their community. Joe's decision to parade Spirit through the rodeo had been met with fierce resistance from the Cherokee Nation Council. Dr. Marcus Red Hawk, despite his evolving views on Spirit's intelligence, still worried about public safety when hundreds of children would be present. "I've seen what Spirit can do in controlled situations," he argued during the emergency council meeting, "but a rodeo is chaos. One spooked horse, one frightened child running at the wrong moment, and we could have a tragedy that destroys everything we've worked toward." Eleanor Crowfeather, now openly acknowledged as Joe's primary supporter in the community, had countered with Cherokee tradition. "Our ancestors lived alongside powerful animals because they understood respect and partnership. Are we so disconnected from our heritage that we fear what our grandfathers would have celebrated?" The debate had split the community down generational lines, with younger Cherokee families generally supporting Spirit's inclusion, while older members expressed concerns about insurance liability and federal regulations governing livestock in public spaces. The compromise reached was a carefully controlled demonstration. Spirit would enter the main arena during the opening ceremony, supervised by Joe and Dr. Red Hawk, allowing the community to see for themselves whether the bull truly deserved the fear or reverence that had divided them for months. What none of them knew was that Mason and Sophia Thunderheart had seen the rodeo as their perfect opportunity for a final, desperate gambit. Federal surveillance had revealed their increasingly frantic attempts to access their father's inheritance, and Sarah Running Horse's team had intercepted communications suggesting that the siblings planned to use the public event as cover for eliminating both Joe and Spirit in what would appear to be a tragic accident. Mason's plan was devastatingly simple and utterly ruthless. His hired security team had identified a weakness in the rodeo's livestock management system. 5 aggressive bulls from a ranch in Texas that were scheduled for the professional bull riding competition were poorly secured in temporary holding pens. By sabotaging the pen latches during the opening ceremony, Mason could release the bulls into the main arena while Spirit was present, creating chaos that would ensure Spirit would be blamed for any injuries or deaths that resulted. The beauty of the plan lay in its deniability. Mason and Sophia would be present as concerned family members, expressing grief over their brother's tragic accident while inheriting his estate. The bulls would be destroyed as dangerous animals, eliminating the evidence of their father's secret facility, and the investigation into their arms trafficking network would die with Joe. Saturday morning dawned clear and hot, with the kind of merciless Oklahoma sun that turned dust into shimmering mirages and made every shadow precious. Joe had spent the night in Spirit's paddock, sleeping against the bull's massive side as he'd done increasingly often since discovering the truth about his family. The physical comfort of Spirit's presence helped quiet the nightmares about Sam, but more importantly, it reinforced the bond that would be crucial for the day ahead. Sarah Running Horse and her team had positioned themselves throughout the fairgrounds, disguised as vendors, competitors, and spectators. Eleanor Crow. Feather occupied a prime position in the grandstand, her trained eye monitoring crowd dynamics and potential threats. Dr. Redhawk waited near the arena entrance with tranquilizer equipment, still nervous about the demonstration, but committed to providing medical backup if needed. The opening ceremony began with traditional Cherokee songs and prayers, led by Elder Joseph Stans Bear, whose weathered hands trembled slightly as he offered tobacco to the four directions. The fairgrounds filled with the scents of fry bread and wood smoke, the sounds of children laughing and drums beating in rhythm with heartbeats that had echoed across Cherokee territory for generations. When Joe led Spirit into the arena, a hush fell over the crowd that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with awe. The massive bull moved with surprising grace, his black hide gleaming in the afternoon sun, while the rust-red patches across his shoulders caught the light like burnished copper. Spirit's intelligent eyes surveyed the crowd with calm interest, his posture alert but unthreatened, his massive head turning toward the children in the front rows with what could only be described as gentle curiosity. Elder Joseph Stans Bear approached the bull without hesitation, his aged hands coming to rest on Spirit's broad forehead while he spoke in Cherokee. The words were traditional blessings for animals that served the people, and Spirit stood perfectly still during the ceremony, as if understanding the significance of the moment. "This bull carries the spirit of our ancestors," Elder Stans Bear announced to the crowd in English. "He protects our children and honors our traditions. Those who fear him fear their own heritage." That's when Mason's sabotage began to unfold. From his position in the grandstand, Mason used a remote-controlled device to trigger the modified pen latches holding the Texas bulls. The 5 animals, bred for aggression and trained to buck, burst from their confinement with explosive violence, charging into the main arena where Spirit stood with Joe and Elder Stans Bear. The crowd's mood shifted from reverence to terror in seconds. Screams erupted from the grandstand as parents grabbed children and spectators scrambled for exits. The arena that had been peaceful moments before became a thundering chaos of hooves, dust, and primal fear as the 5 bulls spread out, their territorial instincts triggered by Spirit's presence and the crowd's panic. But instead of joining the mayhem or fleeing to safety, Spirit did something that would be talked about for generations in Cherokee communities across Oklahoma. The massive bull positioned himself between the aggressive animals and the crowd, using his size and presence to contain the chaos rather than add to it. When the largest of the Texas bulls, a 1,600-pound monster with scarred horns, charged toward the grandstand where families with children sat trapped, Spirit intercepted the attack, absorbing the impact with his own body to prevent the bull from reaching the innocent. Joe found himself moving with instincts he'd learned in Afghanistan, coordinating with spirit in a partnership that transcended species barriers. While the bull used his massive presence to herd the aggressive animals away from spectators, Joe worked with arena staff to open escape routes and guide people to safety. Dr. Redhawk abandoned his tranquilizer equipment and instead grabbed a cattle prod, joining the effort to contain the 5 bulls while protecting Spirit from attacks. The crisis intensified when 6-year-old Mary Dove, the same child Spirit had saved from drowning weeks earlier, became separated from her grandmother in the panic and found herself alone in the arena. The smallest of the Texas bulls, confused and enraged by the chaos, spotted the child and charged with deadly intent. Spirit's response was immediate and heroic. Despite being engaged with 2 other bulls, he broke away from the conflict and placed himself directly in the path of the charging animal. The collision between the 2 bulls shook the arena like an earthquake, but Spirit's sacrifice worked. Mary Dove was unharmed while Spirit absorbed injuries that would have killed the child instantly. Blood streaming from gashes on his shoulders and flanks, Spirit continued to protect the evacuation until every spectator had reached safety. Only then did he allow Dr. Redhawk to approach with medical attention, his massive body trembling with exhaustion and pain, but his eyes still alert, still focused on Joe's voice calling him to safety. The aftermath of the arena chaos revealed Mason's plan in devastating detail. Security cameras had captured him triggering the pen releases, and his hired operatives were identified by Sarah's surveillance team. But more importantly, the entire Cherokee community had witnessed Spirit's heroism firsthand. The bull they had feared as a monster had risked his life to save their children, demonstrating courage and intelligence that shamed those who had called for his destruction. As emergency veterinarians worked to treat Spirit's injuries, Elder Joseph Stans Bear made an announcement that would reshape the community's relationship with both Joe and his guardian. "This bull is no longer Joe Thunderheart's responsibility alone," the elder declared. "He belongs to all of us now, and we will protect him as he protected our children." The crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming, applause that started slowly and built to a thunderous ovation that could be heard across the fairgrounds. Children who had been terrified of Spirit hours earlier now pressed against the arena fence, reaching through to touch his bloodied hide with reverent fingers. But even as the community celebrated Spirit's heroism, Joe knew the real battle was just beginning. Mason's desperate sabotage had failed, but it had also revealed the deadly lengths to which his siblings would go to claim their father's inheritance. The war between family loyalty and justice was about to reach its final devastating climax. Spirit's injuries from the rodeo were worse than anyone had initially realized. Dr. Redhawk's emergency examination revealed internal bleeding, 3 broken ribs, and a deep gash along his left flank that required immediate surgery. The Cherokee Nation's veterinary clinic became an impromptu trauma center as the community's best animal doctors worked through the night to save the bull who had saved their children. Joe refused to leave Spirit's side during the 8-hour operation. He sat in the clinic's waiting room surrounded by Cherokee families who had come to pray for the bull's recovery, children holding drawings they'd made of Spirit, and elders burning sage to guide healing spirits. Eleanor Crow. Feather held Joe's hand as he broke down completely for the first time since discovering his father's secrets. "I can't lose him too," Joe whispered, his voice raw from hours of silent vigil. "Everyone I love dies because of me. Sam, Dad, and now Spirit's dying because I brought him to that damn rodeo." "That bull chose to protect those children," Eleanor said firmly, her weathered Cherokee features reflecting decades of wisdom earned through loss. "Just like Sam chose to serve his country, just like your father chose to fight evil in the shadows." You don't get to carry guilt for other people's courage, Joseph Thunderheart. Around 3 in the morning, Spirit's vital signs began to deteriorate. Dr. Redhawk emerged from surgery with blood on his scrubs and defeat in his eyes. He's fighting, but his body's been through too much trauma. Multiple organ stress, significant blood loss. I've done everything I know how to do. The waiting room fell silent except for the quiet crying of children who had learned to love the gentle giant. Mary Dove, the 6-year-old Spirit had saved twice now, asked her grandmother if she could sing to the bull through the glass window of the recovery room. Her small voice carrying a traditional Cherokee healing song seemed to reach Spirit even in his unconscious state. His breathing steadied and his heart rate improved just enough to give everyone a fragile thread of hope. But even as the community united around Spirit's struggle for life, the investigation into Mason and Sophia's criminal network was reaching its explosive conclusion. Agent Sarah Runninghorse had coordinated with federal prosecutors to prepare simultaneous arrests, but she needed Joe's testimony and the evidence from his father's facility to make the charges stick. The timing was devastating. Spirit's critical condition meant Joe couldn't focus on anything except his guardian's survival. The crisis deepened when Mason and Sophia, desperate and cornered by the failed rodeo sabotage, decided to make one final play for their father's inheritance. Security footage from the hospital showed them arriving together at 3:30 in the morning, ostensibly to visit their injured brother during this family tragedy. But Sarah's surveillance team recognized their presence as reconnaissance for something more sinister. They're planning to eliminate Joe while he's emotionally vulnerable and separated from Spirit, Sarah told Eleanor over secure phone. The hospital's too public for direct violence, but they could easily arrange an accident on his drive home, especially if he's drinking again. The mention of alcohol hit too close to home. Joe had been fighting the urge to drink since Spirit's surgery began, his hands shaking with withdrawal and stress. The bottle of whiskey in his truck's glove compartment called to him like an old friend offering to numb the unbearable possibility of losing another being he loved. Only Eleanor's constant presence and the community's vigil kept him from surrendering to the familiar escape. Mason and Sophia's visit to the clinic was a masterpiece of manipulative theater. They arrived with flowers and concerned expressions, playing the roles of loving siblings rallying around family during crisis. Sophia even managed to cry convincingly as she looked through the window at Spirit's unconscious form connected to monitors and IV drips. "Joe, we know we haven't been the family you needed," Sophia said, her voice perfectly modulated to suggest genuine remorse. "Dad's death made us realize how petty our arguments have been. Maybe we should talk about pooling our inheritances, working together to honor his memory." Mason nodded gravely, his usual arrogance replaced by calculated sincerity. "The trading post could be restored as a memorial to Dad's service. We could establish a foundation, help other veterans like yourself find purpose. But first, you need to take care of yourself. When's the last time you had a real meal or a shower or some sleep?" Their concern felt like poison wrapped in silk. Joe looked at his siblings, successful, wealthy, beautiful people who had murdered his best friend for money, and felt a rage so pure it cleared his mind of everything except crystal clarity. They weren't here to reconcile. They were here to assess his emotional state and plan his destruction. "I appreciate the concern," Joe said carefully, aware that Eleanor was watching the interaction with hawk-like intensity. "But I'm not leaving Spirit until I know he's going to survive." "Of course," Sophia agreed quickly. "We understand completely. We'll stay with you, help you get through this." That's when 6-year-old Mary Dove provided an unexpected moment of truth. The child had been sleeping curled up in her grandmother's lap when she woke to see Mason and Sophia near Spirit's window. Her reaction was immediate and visceral. She began crying and hiding her face, refusing to look at the siblings who had nearly killed her through their sabotage. "She knows," Eleanor whispered to Joe. "Children can sense evil when adults convince themselves to ignore it." The final blow to Joe's emotional stability came at dawn when Dr. Redhawk called him into the recovery room. Spirit had awakened but was struggling to breathe on his own. The massive bull's eyes found Joe immediately, and in that gaze was a communication that transcended species. Spirit was dying, and he knew it. Joe knelt beside the bull's head, his hands gentle on the scarred face that had become more familiar to him than his own reflection. "You saved them all," he whispered. "You saved me. I'm sorry I brought you into this mess." Spirit's response was to move his massive head closer to Joe's, a gesture of comfort that broke something fundamental in Joe's chest. This animal, this guardian his father had spent 5 years training, was using his last strength to console the man he'd been taught to protect. "I have to let you go, don't I?" Joe asked, tears streaming down his face. "You've done enough fighting for one lifetime." But Spirit's eyes held a different message. The bull wasn't asking for release. He was asking for Joe to be strong enough to finish what they'd started together. The evidence against Mason and Sophia couldn't die with Spirit. The justice that Sam Whitehorse deserved couldn't be abandoned because of grief. That's when Mason made his fatal mistake. Seeing Joe's emotional breakdown, he chose that moment to push harder for access to their father's inheritance. "Joe, we need to discuss the trading post's assets while you're here. The property taxes are coming due, and there might be insurance issues if you can't prove the land is being actively managed." The cruelty of using Spirit's critical condition to pressure Joe about money crystallized everything. These weren't his siblings anymore. They were the enemy wearing familiar faces, and they had just revealed themselves completely. Joe looked up from Spirit's bedside to see Mason and Sophia watching him with barely concealed predatory anticipation. They were waiting for him to break, to surrender the fight, to choose grief over justice. They expected the broken veteran to collapse under the weight of losing his guardian. Instead, they saw something that chilled them both. Joe Thunderheart, finding his strength in the worst possible moment. The man who stood up from Spirit's bedside wasn't the drunk they'd dismissed or the victim they'd planned to eliminate. He was a Cherokee warrior who had finally remembered who he was supposed to be. "Get out," Joe said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had been tested by war and found worthy of survival. "Get out before I do something we'll all regret." Mason and Sophia left the clinic, but their departure felt more like a retreat than a victory. They had revealed themselves too clearly, pushed too hard, mistaken grief for weakness. In trying to destroy Joe's spirit, they had instead awakened something far more dangerous than a broken veteran with a guardian bull. They had awakened a soldier with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The miracle began with a song. 6-year-old Mary Dove had been singing traditional Cherokee healing chants to Spirit through the recovery room window for 3 days straight, her small voice carrying melodies that her great-grandmother Eleanor had taught her. On Tuesday morning, as the first light of dawn touched the veterinary clinic, Spirit's massive eyes opened and focused directly on the child who had become his anchor to life. Dr. Redhawk could not explain what he witnessed. By every medical standard, the bull should have died from his injuries. Multiple organ trauma, massive blood loss, and the stress of repeated surgeries had pushed Spirit's body far beyond what any animal should have been able to survive. Yet somehow, Spirit not only stabilized, but began showing signs of remarkable recovery. "It's like he's fighting to live for a specific purpose," Dr. Redhawk told Joe, his veterinary training struggling to reconcile the clinical evidence with what he was observing. "His vital signs improve whenever you're in the room, and he becomes agitated when you leave. I've never seen anything like this level of intentional healing." Joe understood what Dr. Redhawk couldn't quite articulate. Spirit wasn't just recovering from physical trauma, he was refusing to abandon his mission. The bull had been trained by Colonel Robert to protect Joe, and that training had become something deeper than conditioning. It had become love, loyalty, and an unbreakable bond that transcended the normal relationship between human and animal. The turning point came when Agent Sarah Runninghorse arrived at the clinic with news that changed everything. Federal investigators had discovered Colonel Robert's ultimate fail-safe, a network of hidden cameras throughout the trading post that had been recording continuously for 5 years. Every conversation, every transaction, every criminal planning session that Mason and Sophia had conducted thinking they were safe had been documented in digital detail. "Your father was more thorough than we ever imagined," Sarah told Joe as they sat in the clinic's waiting room surrounded by Cherokee families who had maintained their vigil for Spirit. The surveillance system captured Mason orchestrating arms deals, Sophia coordinating money laundering operations, and most damning of all, their discussion of the specific IED components that killed Samuel Whitehorse. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Audio recordings of Mason laughing about dead soldiers buying his retirement, and video of Sophia celebrating a successful weapons transaction knowing it would fund terrorist attacks. The federal case against them was now prosecutable without Joe's testimony, which meant he could focus entirely on Spirit's recovery without jeopardizing the justice Sam Whitehorse deserved. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. The surveillance had also captured the true story of Spirit's scars and the mysterious intelligence that had made him such an effective guardian. Colonel Robert's training hadn't been limited to simple commands and protective behaviors. He had been conducting a 5-year psychological study of animal-human bonding under stress conditions, documenting how trauma could create extraordinary connections between species. The hidden recordings showed Spirit as a younger bull, working with Colonel Robert through scenarios that closely mimicked the dangers Joe would eventually face. The bull had been trained not just to protect, but to recognize specific types of threats, to distinguish between genuine danger and false alarms, and most remarkably, to provide emotional support for someone suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. "Your father knew you'd come home broken," Sarah explained, her voice heavy with the weight of Colonel Robert's foresight. "He spent 5 years creating a healing relationship that would save your life. Spirit isn't just your guardian. He's your therapist, your anchor, your pathway back to being whole." The vindication of Colonel Robert's plan became clear as Spirit's recovery accelerated. The bull's presence had indeed been healing Joe's PTSD in ways that traditional therapy had failed to achieve. The simple act of caring for another living being, the physical comfort of Spirit's massive presence during nightmares, and the responsibility of protecting something innocent had gradually rebuilt Joe's sense of purpose and self-worth. Eleanor Crow, Feather, drawing on her Cherokee heritage and CIA training, provided the final piece of the puzzle. "Your father understood something that modern medicine often forgets," she told Joe as they watched Spirit slowly stand for the first time since his surgery. "Healing happens in relationships, not in isolation. He gave you a relationship that could survive anything: war, trauma, even your family's betrayal." The community's response to Spirit's recovery was nothing short of transformational. Cherokee families who had initially feared the bull now brought their children to visit him, turning the veterinary clinic into an informal gathering place where traditional stories were shared and cultural connections were strengthened. Spirit became not just Joe's guardian, but a symbol of resilience for the entire community. Dr. Redhawk, humbled by Spirit's recovery and his own previous prejudices, made a public apology that would be remembered for generations. Standing before the Cherokee Nation Council, He acknowledged his fear-based opposition to Spirit and pledged to establish the first animal therapy program in Oklahoma specifically designed for veterans with PTSD. "I was wrong about this bull, and I was wrong about what healing looks like," Dr. Red Hawk said, his voice carrying the weight of genuine remorse. "Spirit has shown us that courage comes in many forms, and sometimes the medicine we need most comes from the connections we're afraid to make." The federal arrests of Mason and Sophia Thunderhart made national news. But the story that captured public attention wasn't their criminal activities. It was the relationship between a broken veteran and the bull who had saved his life. Media outlets struggled to categorize the story. Was it a crime drama, a heartwarming animal tale, or a commentary on veteran health care? The answer was that it was all three, woven together in ways that defied simple narrative boundaries. Mason's arrest came first. Federal agents surrounding his Tulsa tech company as employees watched their CEO led away in handcuffs. His reaction was typical: arrogant denial followed by attempts to blame others and minimize his role in the arms trafficking network. Even faced with overwhelming evidence, Mason showed no remorse for the soldiers who had died because of his greed. Sophia's arrest was more dramatic. Federal agents found her at her flagship gallery in Oklahoma City, attempting to destroy financial records that linked her businesses to international money laundering operations. Her breakdown was complete and devastating. Years of suppressed guilt and desperate attempts to earn her father's respect, culminating in hysterical confessions that provided additional evidence against the entire criminal network. The contrast between the siblings' responses revealed the depths of their different motivations. Mason was a sociopath who felt entitled to profit from others' suffering, while Sophia was a damaged daughter whose desperate need for validation had led her into moral compromises that eventually consumed her completely. Joe's decision about how to respond to his siblings' arrests surprised everyone, including Sarah and Eleanor. Instead of celebrating their downfall or seeking revenge, he chose a path that reflected the healing Spirit had brought to his life. He visited Sophia in federal custody, offering forgiveness and support while maintaining absolute clarity about the justice she owed to Sam Whitehorse and the other victims of their crimes. "I don't forgive what you did," Joe told his sister through the prison glass, Spirit's influence evident in his calm strength. "But I forgive who you were when you did it, a broken person trying to fill a hole that could never be filled with money or approval. Dad's love was never something you had to earn, Sophia. It was something you were too hurt to receive." Sophia's response was the first genuine emotion Joe had seen from her in years, tears that came from recognition rather than self-pity. She agreed to cooperate fully with federal prosecutors, providing testimony that would dismantle the entire international arms trafficking network and prevent future atrocities. Mason remained defiant to the end, refusing all contact with Joe and maintaining his innocence despite overwhelming evidence. His final act of spite was attempting to contest their father's will, claiming that Joe was mentally incompetent to manage the inheritance due to his PTSD and alcoholism. The legal challenge backfired spectacularly when Cherokee Nation elders, community members, and even Dr. Red Hawk testified about Joe's transformation and his responsible stewardship of both Spirit and his father's legacy. The court not only upheld Joe's inheritance, but publicly commended his courage in exposing his family's crimes despite the personal cost. Spirit's full recovery took 6 months, but the bond between him and Joe had been permanently strengthened by their shared ordeal. The bull who had once been seen as a burden had become the foundation for healing that extended far beyond one broken veteran. Their story had proven that courage, loyalty, and love could triumph over fear, greed, and betrayal, lessons that would inspire others for generations to come. 1 year later, the Thunderheart Trading Post had been transformed into something Colonel Robert could never have imagined, but would have been proud to witness. The Samuel Whitehorse Memorial Foundation occupied the renovated buildings, its mission simple yet revolutionary: healing veterans with PTSD through partnerships with rescued animals. The Foundation's chief therapy officer was a 1,500-pound Brahman bull named Spirit, whose gentle intelligence had already changed 47 lives and counting. Joe Thunderheart stood in the morning Oklahoma sun, watching 12 veterans work alongside their animal partners in the Foundation's expanded facilities. Former Army Sergeant Maria Santos groomed Thunder, a rescued Clydesdale whose calm strength helped her manage anxiety attacks. Navy veteran David Running Bear worked with Sage, a border collie whose boundless energy matched his own journey from depression to hope. Each partnership had been carefully crafted, matching human trauma with animal healing in ways that traditional therapy alone had never achieved. The transformation wasn't limited to the veterans. The animals, all rescues from abuse, neglect, or abandonment, had found new purpose as healers. Spirit, now fully recovered from his rodeo injuries with only faint scars marking his heroism, moved among the other animals like a wise patriarch, his presence calming both humans and animals alike. Dr. Marcus Redhawk, who served as the Foundation's veterinary director, often marveled at Spirit's ability to sense when someone was struggling and position himself nearby until the crisis passed. Eleanor Crow Feather, at 79, had become the Foundation's director and chief advocate. Her CIA background proved invaluable in navigating federal bureaucracy, securing grants, and establishing partnerships with Veterans Affairs hospitals across the country. More importantly, her Cherokee wisdom provided the cultural foundation that made the program unique. Traditional healing ceremonies were integrated with modern therapy techniques, creating a holistic approach that honored both ancient traditions and contemporary medical understanding. The community that had once feared Spirit now celebrated him as a local hero. Children from the Cherokee Nation frequently visited the Foundation, bringing drawings and letters for Mr. Spirit and learning about courage, compassion, and the bonds between humans and animals. Mary Dove, now 7 years old and Spirit's most devoted young friend, had become the Foundation's unofficial junior ambassador, sharing her story of being saved by the gentle giant with visitors from around the world. The Foundation's success had attracted national attention, resulting in documentary crews, medical researchers, and policymakers studying the program as a model for veteran care nationwide. Dr. Redhawk found himself traveling to conferences across the country, presenting research that showed a 94% improvement rate in PTSD symptoms among program participants, statistics that were revolutionizing how the medical community approached trauma treatment. But the most profound change was in Joe himself. The broken veteran who had inherited a burden 18 months earlier had become a respected leader in both the Cherokee community and the National Veterans Advocacy Movement. His sobriety, maintained through Spirit's constant companionship and the purpose of serving others, had reached 15 months, a milestone he marked not with celebration, but with quiet gratitude for each day of clarity he'd been given. The financial foundation for the program came from Colonel Robert's carefully accumulated fortune, managed through trusts that ensured the money would support veterans and their families for generations. Joe had used the inheritance not for personal comfort, but for expanding the program's reach, purchasing adjacent land to accommodate more animals and veterans, and establishing satellite programs in 5 other states. Sophia's cooperation with federal prosecutors had proven invaluable in dismantling the international arms trafficking network that had claimed Sam Whitehorse's life. Her testimony led to 47 additional arrests across 12 countries and the recovery of millions of dollars in blood money that was being redirected to victims' families and veteran support programs. Sophia herself was serving a reduced sentence in minimum security federal prison, where she was pursuing a degree in social work and maintaining regular correspondence with Joe about her own journey toward redemption. Mason remained unrepentant and defiant, serving 25 years to life in maximum security federal prison. His tech company had been dissolved, its assets liquidated to pay restitution to victims' families. He had refused all contact with Joe even when informed that the foundation was providing therapy services to veterans who had been injured by weapons he had helped traffic. Some people, Joe had learned, choose to remain broken rather than face the work of healing. The anniversary of Spirit's heroism at the Cherokee Rodeo had become an annual celebration called Spirit Day, honoring not just the bull's courage, but the broader message of overcoming fear through understanding. The event combined traditional Cherokee ceremonies with educational programs about animal therapy, PTSD awareness, and the power of community support in healing trauma. This year's Spirit Day celebration drew visitors from across the country, including several members of Congress who were considering legislation to expand animal therapy programs for veterans. Joe found himself in the surreal position of briefing senators and representatives while Spirit grazed peacefully nearby, occasionally approaching the distinguished visitors with the calm confidence that had won over so many skeptics. The success of this program isn't really about animals, Joe explained to a group of VA officials during their tour of the facilities. It's about relationships that create safety, purpose, and unconditional acceptance. Spirit didn't cure my PTSD. He gave me a reason to fight for something other than my own survival. That shift from victim to protector, from broken to healing others, that's where the real transformation happens. Agent Sarah Runninghorse, now retired from the FBI and serving on the Foundation's board of directors, often reflected on how the investigation that had brought her to Broken Arrow had evolved into something none of them could have predicted. "We came here to solve a crime," she told Joe during one of their weekly strategy meetings. "But we ended up discovering a new way to heal wounds that traditional medicine couldn't touch." The Foundation's impact extended beyond veterans to include their families, particularly children struggling with the secondary trauma of having a parent with PTSD. Programs pairing military children with gentle animals had shown remarkable success in helping young people understand and cope with their parents' invisible wounds. Mary Dove had become a mentor in this program, her own experience with Spirit giving her unique insight into how animals could provide comfort and understanding that adults sometimes couldn't offer. The most moving aspect of the Foundation's work was the way it honored Sam Whitehorse's memory while creating hope for the living. Sam's parents, tribal elders Joseph and Martha Whitehorse, had become regular visitors to the Foundation, finding comfort in seeing their son's sacrifice transformed into healing for others. A memorial garden dedicated to Sam occupied the center of the property, where veterans often sat in quiet reflection with their animal partners. "Sam would have loved this place," Joe often told new veterans during their orientation. "He had this gift for seeing potential in broken things, broken people, broken situations, broken dreams. He saw potential in me when I couldn't see it in myself. Now Spirit helps me see that same potential in others." The Foundation's research component had attracted partnerships with major universities studying the neurological and psychological mechanisms behind animal-assisted therapy. Brain imaging studies of veterans before and after participating in the program showed measurable changes in areas associated with trust, emotional regulation, and stress response. Spirit himself had become something of a research celebrity, his unusual intelligence and therapeutic instincts documented in papers published in veterinary and psychological journals. As the sun set on another day at the Samuel Whitehorse Memorial Foundation, Joe stood with Spirit in the pasture where his journey had begun 18 months earlier. The trading post that had once symbolized failure and decay now bustled with purposeful activity. The cave that had hidden his father's secrets now served as a secure archive for the Foundation's research and documentation. The community that had once been divided by fear now worked together to support healing and growth. "We did good today, didn't we, big guy?" Joe said, his hand resting on Spirit's massive neck as they watched veterans and their animal partners settling in for the evening. Spirit's response was a gentle nudge that had become their ritual, a simple acknowledgement of partnership, purpose, and the unbreakable bond that had saved them both. The Foundation served 847 veterans and 1,200 family members across 6 states, with plans to expand to 10 more locations within the next 3 years. But the numbers, impressive as they were, couldn't capture the real measure of success. The suicides prevented, the families reunited, the hope restored, and the proof that even the deepest wounds could heal when approached with patience, understanding, and love. As darkness settled over the Oklahoma plains, lights came on in the Foundation buildings where some veterans chose to live on-site while working through their healing journey. Each light represented a life reclaimed from despair, a future rebuilt from wreckage, and the continuing truth that Spirit had taught them all. Sometimes the angels we need most come in forms we don't expect, and sometimes healing an entire community starts with one broken veteran and one misunderstood bull who chose to see each other's hearts. The monsters we fear are often the angels we need most, and the broken places in our lives can become the foundation for helping others find their way home. 5 years after that first desperate night when Spirit had pushed the gun from Joe's trembling hands, the Samuel Whitehorse Memorial Foundation had become a beacon of hope, recognized across America. The broken veteran who had once sat drunk in a trailer behind a failing gas station now stood before Congress, testifying about the revolutionary success of animal-assisted therapy for PTSD treatment. Spirit, now 12 years old but still magnificent, grazed peacefully in the Foundation's expanded pastures alongside 43 other therapy animals. His legacy lived on through his 3 gentle offspring, each inheriting their father's remarkable ability to sense human pain and provide healing comfort. The bull who had once been scheduled for execution was now featured in medical textbooks as proof that healing comes in unexpected forms. Joe's own transformation remained the program's greatest miracle. Sober for 5 years, happily married to Dr. Sarah Mitchell, and father to twin daughters who considered Spirit their oversized grandfather, he had discovered that broken things could become beautiful when rebuilt with love and purpose. As sunset painted the Oklahoma sky, Joe stood with Spirit one final time, both of them gray-touched but content. "Thank you for saving my life, old friend," Joe whispered. Spirit's gentle nudge replied, "Thank you for saving mine." Their story had proven that sometimes the monsters we fear are exactly the angels we need most.